Alana has said, and continuing to that I'm not reading you the passage, but I'm telling you the story. So the story so far, a couple of weeks ago, we watched on as John takes up his position in the local town square, the local court, and starts giving his testimony to the incredible things that he has seen and witnessed. And we are witnessing his witness. And his witness began then after his opening statement last week as he introduced us to the witness of John the Baptist, saying, "There's someone coming who is so much greater than me, I'm not worthy to untie his shoelaces. The Lamb of God who will take away the sins of the world." And over the next few days, Jesus started collecting his first disciples, people who started to follow him on the basis of, well, who knows? But they wondered, is he the guy? And their lives were turned upside down. So this is how the story today goes. So on the third day after this, there was a wedding in the town of Cana in the region of Galilee. And Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus himself was also invited along with his new disciples. Now, the wine ran out. And so Jesus' mother, she says to him, "They've got no more wine." And Jesus says, "Woman, how is what I'm concerned for connected to what you're concerned for? My great hour isn't yet here." And so his mother says to the servants, to the waitstaff, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now, there were standing there 6 large stone jars that the Jews used to use for their ceremonial washing, their purification. They were large. Each one held around about 80 to 120 litres. And Jesus said to the waitstaff, "Fill up those jars." So they filled them to the brim. And then he said, "Now decant some of it and take it to the head butler." So they took some to him. And when the head butler tasted this water, which was now wine, now he didn't know where it had come from. The waitstaff knew because they had decanted it and taken it to him. But he summoned the bridegroom and he said, "What's going on? Everyone knows that at the very beginning of the wedding you serve the best wine, the really good stuff. And later on, like now, you give them the lesser quality stuff. But you've kept back this fantastic stuff until now." Now, this was the first of the signs that Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee, through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples put their trust in him. So Jesus then left and he went down from Cana to Capernaum along with his mother and his brothers and also his disciples, and they stayed there just a few days because the Jewish Passover festival was approaching. And so Jesus then went up to Jerusalem. And when he got to the temple, he saw there traders selling cattle and sheep and doves, and he saw the international currency exchange merchants. And Jesus was furious. He made together a whip out of ropes, and he drove the sheep and the cattle out of the temple courts. He upturned the money boxes of the money merchants, and he said to those who are selling doves, "What are you guys doing? Get these out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a market hall?" Now, his disciples remembered that the Bible had actually said that a passionate commitment to your house will devour me. Anyway, the Jewish leaders approached Jesus and they said, "So, what sign are you going to demonstrate to us to show your right to do these things?" And Jesus said, "All right, I'll give you a sign. You demolish this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up again." And the Jews said to him, this temple is a 46-year building project, and you're going to raise it up again in 3 days? Now, the temple Jesus had been speaking about was his own body, and after he had been raised up from the dead, his disciples remembered what he'd said here, and they believed the scriptures and the word Jesus had spoken. Now, while Jesus was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, while the festival was going on, many people put their trust in him because they saw all of the signs he was doing. And yet Jesus didn't entrust himself to them because he knew people. He didn't need anyone to testify to him about what was in humankind. He knew what was in a person. And that's the end of the story for this week. Have a little reflection, a little share, 1 minute. If you'd like, just think to yourself or share with the person next to you. What struck you from that story today? All right, there's your short minute. Anyone want to share with the rest of us what jumped out at them this time? Margaret?
How Jesus obeyed his mother.
Okay.
And told the disciples to do what he says.
Okay. Interesting. We'll see how much he obeyed his mother. It's an interesting interchange, isn't it? Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Or did his mother obey Jesus? Good question. Yeah.
Maybe this is a question. When he's in the temple, it seems like it's happening at the time that the disciples remember the zeal for you.
Yeah.
So that sort of like is a bit of a sign to them.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's right. The other, so the comment was when he's in the temple and the disciples remember that thing about zeal for your house will consume me. They seem to be remembering that while he is doing it, whereas the other thing they only get after he's risen from the dead. And is that another little sign for the disciples? Very good, very good. We'll think about signs a bit more. All right, let's get into it. We have seen his glory, the glory of the unique and precious one from the Father, full of grace and truth. Last week we met Jesus for the first time as he called his first disciples. And if you were here, we were struck by how little it took, how little it seemed to take for their lives to be turned upside down by meeting him. Just a couple of hours of conversation or even a single divine supernatural observation, and that was it. They were convinced that he's the Messiah, he's God's king, and that they should give up everything to follow him. And today, of course, as I mentioned last week and as we heard in the story just now, today we actually see the first clear display of Jesus' glory. Although, what was the glory that they actually saw? It's probably not what you think it was. Because in this whole story today, Jesus actually, if you listen carefully, he did many amazing things. Only one of them was described in detail. At one point, the people asked him to do a sign. But at the end of the story, we heard he's doing lots of signs in Jerusalem. And yet no one seems to be responding super positively towards him. Oh yes, they trusted in him when they saw his signs, but Jesus didn't trust their response. And next week we'll see one of these people and his ongoing deep unbelief. So did these people actually see his miracles? Did they see his glory? And are those two things the same? Well, let's have a closer look at perhaps the most famous of all of Jesus' miracles when he turned the water into wine at the wedding in Cana in Galilee. The story is pretty simple, of course. It's a local wedding. There's a local family. Jesus' mother seems to be pretty close with the family. She's at the wedding. And Jesus and his disciples, presumably those 5 guys we heard about last week, Andrew, presumably John the Witness, Simon Peter, Philip and Nathanael, Jesus and his disciples seem to have been invited as well. Now Mary is obviously close to the bridegroom's family because when disaster strikes this little wedding, she is quick to get involved and quick to involve her oldest son. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Now, at this point in Jesus' life, I think it's fairly safe to assume that Jesus' legal father, Joseph, had died some time before. The fact that Mary is listed as the chief invitee from the family says that Joseph's no longer around. And so in this mini crisis, she automatically turns to Jesus for help, her oldest son, the oldest male with the greatest amount of responsibility in the family's affairs. Because, of course, this is a crisis, a disaster, it's a catastrophe. Mary's friends are about to be profoundly shamed, socially disgraced, because there is no more wine. They have run out. Now, a wedding in those days, we think that our weddings nowadays are a big deal, right? You know, wedding planners and how many zeros on the end of the cost and all of that. But it's nothing compared to what they had. A wedding in those days could last for a week, the wedding reception, that is. And it was the bridegroom's responsibility to cater for it, to make sure there was enough food and drink to last for the whole celebration. In fact, apparently, they tell us that if the bridegroom failed in this responsibility, then the bride's family could take him to court and sue him. This isn't just a minor catering error that's going on here. You know, you got the head count wrong. This is a major and humiliating miscalculation. And so Mary, as a close family friend, leaps in to help out and turns to her responsible oldest son for support. They've run out of wine. We should do something about it. But Jesus responds to her a little bit strangely. He's not being rude to his mother, but he doesn't call her mum. He calls her literally woman. Now, in that culture, it wasn't quite as abrupt as that would, if a son said to his mum today, "Hey, woman," it's not going to go down too well. In that context, it wasn't quite as bad, but it certainly wasn't that kind of tender and a familiar way that you would expect a son to address his mother. I think it's probably a bit more like him saying to her, "Well, Mrs. Jacobson," now, Mary's husband Joseph was the son of Jacob, so let's assume that Jacob's son is their surname, all right? And he says to her, "Mrs. Jacobson, why do you involve me?" Or literally, he says, "What to me and to you?" That is, what is there that concerns me and also concerns you? In other words, he's saying, my interests are not the same as your interests. My business is not the same as your business. We don't have a common will here. You're worried about the wine. My concern lies somewhere else. Because he says to her, "My big hour has not yet come." What does he mean, his hour has not yet come? This poor couple, they're in a terrible bind on the brink of social catastrophe. The wine has run out. Jesus' mother is just trying to be helpful. And he says, "No, that's your concern, not mine. Because my hour hasn't yet come." What hour? Well, I'm sure Mary doesn't have a clue either. But she's nothing if not persistent, because she turns to the servants, to the waitstaff at this wedding, and she says, "Okay, well, whatever Jesus tells you, do it." Now, I don't think she has any idea what Jesus will actually do. I don't think she is assuming miracle here. You know, Jesus is going to solve this for you with an amazing thing. You just watch and see. No. We're told at the end of the story that this was the first sign Jesus did through which he revealed his glory. Now, there's no great list of precedents of miraculous signs for Mary to go on. And so what is she expecting that he will do? We don't know. In fact, I suspect she doesn't know. And actually, that's the point. Because she has heard Jesus' gentle rebuke, and she has taken it on board. Okay, so you've got something different in mind. I'd like you to fix the problem, but you've got something different in mind. I trust you. Do whatever he says. This, by the way, is the only recorded command of Mary in the Bible, and it's not a bad one, is it? Don't look at me. Look at him. Listen to him. Do what he says. And so what Jesus says now takes this local domestic catastrophe and spins it in a whole new direction, a direction deep with significance and symbolism. Because he points the servants to the 6 large stone water jars, probably sitting near the entrance of the house. These water jars, those of you who were here last week, we heard that for the Jews, washing, baptism, wasn't just about hygiene and physical cleanliness, but it was about purity and spiritual cleanliness. These jars were there so that the guests at the wedding feast could be spiritually cleansed and purified and made acceptable to participate in the life of God's people as they washed off all their spiritual defilements before they came into the wedding venue. And so these jars represent, if you like, the whole Jewish system of spiritual purification, the gateway into the life of God's people. And these jars are big. 6 of them, each of them holding, well, my footnote says 75 to 115 litres. Someone else said 80 to 120. That's easier to say, so that's the one I'll go with. But whatever it is, we're talking about somewhere around 500 to 700 litres in total. A more kind of accessible comparison, if you take 3 or 4 average bathtubs and fill them right to the top. That's how much water there is. It's a lot of water. And Jesus tells the servants to fill these jars. They fill them to the brim. Then he tells them to draw some out and to take it to the master of the banquet, the guy in charge of the whole event. And so they do. And when he tastes this water, well, he discovers that it's the most incredible wine he's ever had. And he, of course, doesn't know where it's come from. He didn't see where they drew the water out, although the servants knew because they'd drawn it out. And so I guess he thought that this came from a bottle in the forgotten back corner of the bridegroom's cellar, or had been dropped down the back of a couch or whatever. But what a bottle! I mean, this is Grange Hermitage vintage stuff. This is the top drop. This is the best stuff. And he's not simply flabbergasted. He's not simply amazed. He is actually outraged. Our Bibles say that he called the bridegroom aside. Actually, literally, he called him out. He summoned him. I think he's making a bit of a public scene here because this is so ridiculous, what's happening. What the bridegroom has done is the opposite of what any half-sane host would do. As the master of the banquet says, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. How dumb are you? First of all, you've almost run out of wine, and then you've got this hidden stash of Grange Hermitage, and you're only bringing it out now when you could be serving the guests fermented dishwater and they wouldn't know the difference. What are you doing, and how much of it? Of course, the master of the banquet probably doesn't yet know how much, but he's going to get a pretty good idea as bottle after bottle after bottle of this most incredible wine continues to flow for, well, how long would it take to get through that much wine. We're not talking an Australian wedding here. Now, I did a quick calculation. 600 litres of wine equals 800 standard bottles. And a single bottle of Grange, the best ones, sell for $1,000 plus. We're talking about around about $1 million worth of wine here. $1 million. And John says that what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory. And his disciples believed in him. They put their faith in him. They saw his glory. Of course they saw it. What an extraordinary thing to see. What an extraordinary glory. Except that, well, didn't the servants see it too? Didn't they see exactly the same thing, this massive abundance of incredible wine transforming this local little wedding disaster into the greatest party the region has ever seen? They saw that, didn't they? And yet we're not told that they believe. In fact, the clear implication is John says only that the disciples saw Jesus' glory and believed in him. So what did the others see? Or more to the point, what glory did the disciples see and believe? The others saw the miracle. There's no doubt about that. I mean, they were the ones who served the water now turned into wine and who heard the public declaration of the master of the banquet that this is the best drop he's ever had. They saw the miracle, but they didn't see the glory. So what was Jesus' glory? Well, as with basically everything in this testimony that John the witness is giving, the whole of John's gospel, his opening statement back at the beginning captures the whole thing. We have seen his glory, the glory of the unique and precious one from the Father, full of grace and truth. Isn't this moment at this wedding a moment of beautiful grace, of kindness, of generosity to save the blushes of this poor, underprepared bridegroom on his wedding day? Well, except that this is about much more than just generosity. Because what else does John say in his opening statement? He says, verse 16, out of his abundance, we, all of us, have received a grace beyond grace. A fresh grace over against the old one, a better grace in place of the one we had before. Do you see, we're getting a little closer to Jesus' glory now, aren't we? Because there's a definite instead of in what Jesus does at the wedding. There are the jars of purification, the old Jewish practices of washing for spiritual cleansing so that you're not disqualified from participating in the life of God's people. A ceremony, a ritual to represent an unseen reality. That's the old grace. And then there's this, what Jesus does, this party. This abundance, this celebration, the like of which no one has ever seen before. It reminds you actually of a wonderful picture of the end of time in the prophet Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 25, the prophet says, on this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. On this mountain he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. In that day they will say, surely this is our God. We trusted in him and he saved us. This is the Lord. We trusted in him. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation. Do you see that? On this mountain, the Lord will provide a feast of rich foods, the finest of wines, the shroud that enfolds all nations he will take away. He will remove the disgrace of his people. Do you see what God is promising at the end of time, not a ritual or a ceremony of purification, but a party, a feast, a banquet, the best of the best, every tear and every disgrace wiped away in the day of his ultimate salvation. And that's what Jesus provides here, isn't it? His mother couldn't have imagined that. That's not what she asked for. So much better. In a small way, in miniature, in anticipation, he provides a mini banquet as a picture of the great banquet still to come. Now, Jesus is just flexing his little finger here and saying, what abundance I bring. What extraordinary abundance, so far superior to the abundance, the grace, the blessing you've had in the old ways, in the law, in the ceremonies, in the water purification rites. Now, I'll take that water and I'll turn it into $1 million of the best wine ever. Into the joy, the pleasure of the eternal banquet of the eternal God with his people. They saw his glory. His glory was not the miracle. In fact, notice that John doesn't use the word miracle here. In fact, he never uses the word miracle in his whole testimony, in the whole of this gospel. The word he uses is sign. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, the first sign. What is a sign? Well, a sign is something that shows you or that points you to something else, isn't it? Sydney, 50 kilometres, parking over here. A sign points to a reality beyond itself. Can you imagine going on a big holiday up to the Gold Coast, to all the theme parks there, Dream World, Movie World, Wet n Wild, and so on. And as you're driving there all the way on the M1, you're getting close. You know it because you see a sign. It says Wet n Wild, 35 kilometres, whatever it might be. And so what do? Well, you pull over underneath the sign, don't you? You get the family out of the car, you unpack your towels and swimmers, you put on your sunscreen, you serve out your Vegemite sandwiches, and you spend the day there under the sign. That's what you do? Of course not. How ridiculous. Why would you do that? The sign isn't the attraction. The sign is just the sign. You follow the sign to the attraction, you unpack the car, get your towels, put on your sunscreen, only when you get to the attraction so that you can enjoy it. And what the disciples have seen here is not just the sign, but they have seen the glory that the sign is pointing to. And that's why they have put their faith in Jesus. The servants have seen the sign, but nothing more. And so they don't believe in him. Sure, they've got an incredible story to tell their kids and their grandkids for many years to come about this guy who did this amazing thing, this miracle. Who was he? Some guy called Jesus. What was he like? Well, he was a bit abrupt with his mum, but I guess we can forgive him that because, boy, what a party he put on. And what became of this Jesus in the end? Not too sure. But the disciples, out of his abundance, we have received, all of us, a grace beyond grace. A vision, a foretaste of the ultimate party forever in the presence of God among his people. That's what they believed. And as the story continues, we see, if you like, the exact point made, but in reverse. It's now time for the Passover festival in Jerusalem, one of the three big annual festivals that every Jew was expected to go to. And so Jesus goes, this great festival celebrating the time 1,500 years before Jesus, when God had miraculously rescued his people out of slavery in Egypt and brought them to himself. It's an opportunity for God's people to come to God in prayer, in joy, in hope for a new rescue, an ultimate rescue to come. And so Jesus goes to Jerusalem, and what does he find? He finds that the market day has set up shop right in the outer court of the temple itself. Now, there's a kind of a practical justification for what's going on here. People have come from all over to the festival, and they're supposed to be bringing with them an animal to be sacrificed. But that's pretty hard. If you're flying internationally, it's hard to get a cow into your carry-on luggage, right? So what they do is they set up this system where you come and buy when you arrive. That's what the authorities have set up. Much easier. And Jesus is furious. How can anyone possibly pray or concentrate or celebrate with that infernal racket of the animal market going on right there? Not to mention the dishonour to God. This is his house, the symbol of his holy presence among his people, and it's his festival, the celebration of his power and his mercy towards his people when he saves them. And instead of celebrating him, the people are now haggling over the best bargain at the butcher's shop. And so Jesus clears the place out. But the religious authorities are none too pleased. What do you think you're doing? Who do you think you are? Give us some kind of a sign to prove your authority to behave this way. It's interesting they ask for a sign, isn't it? They've, I suspect, heard about what Jesus has done in Cana of Galilee. It's been a few days, news travels fast, especially about something like that. And even if not that, at the end of the chapter we discover Jesus has actually been doing lots of signs while he's at the festival in Jerusalem. So why do they want another sign? How many signs do you need? And so Jesus gives them a sign, but not the kind of sign they were expecting. Jesus says, here's what I'll do. If you destroy this temple, I'll rebuild it in 3 days. This temple was an amazing piece of architecture. A massive building that took your breath away, and it had been 46 years in the making. And a wonder of engineering as well. Some of the stones in this making up this temple were like meters long and a couple of meters high and deep. And so, modern machinery would be hard-pressed to move them around. And Jesus, sure, he's got a trade. He's handy. But he's going to rebuild this across a long weekend? Really? But they hadn't seen the sign in Jesus' words. It's like they'd pulled over at the roadside and unpacked their towels and swimmers and looking around for where the theme park was. But John comments, but the temple Jesus had spoken of was his body. Now this time even the disciples don't get the reference there. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. And then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. But do you see the sign? Destroy my body, this great temple, God himself among you, and after 3 days I'll raise it again. This is the sign that no one gets, the glory that no one sees, at least not yet. And so no one believes. The glory of God the Son as the Lamb of God, dying for the sins of the whole world and then rising again in victory as the world's perfect and eternal King. The ultimate rescue mission from our ultimate slavery, providing our ultimate and guaranteed hope forever. What a glory that is. And so have you seen that glory? Have you seen who Jesus is, what he came to do? Or have you only seen the sign? A fantastic party trick at a humble country wedding. A man dying a sad death on a brutal Roman cross. Is that all you see? Or have you seen his glory, the extraordinary host of the heavenly banquet, the beautiful Lord of heaven and earth? Have you seen his glory? And will you believe, will you trust in him? Let's pray.